Hello and welcome to another discussion on contemporary American foreign policy. I'm Andrew Milton, and today I want to talk about models for thinking about foreign policy making. Last time we talked about some idea constructs, the one many problem, and the three I's: institutions, individuals, and ideas, as general constructs for thinking about how anything operates. Today, a little bit more specifically, foreign policy. And I'm going to draw on an old theory set to just give an overview of what we're trying to do as foreign policy analysts. And I want to make a couple observations about this before we even start. We are, as social scientists, we are trying to understand how and why things operate the way they do, why individuals and states and organizations within states make the decisions they do about foreign policy and execute those decisions the way they do. So we are not making normative or moral arguments at this point about foreign policy. We're trying to explain what we see happening. And from those explanations, we're then better able to make our judgments and offer advice, so to speak. So I want to be clear when we talk about these models, that what we're saying is, here's a way to analyze what's happening. It's not to express a preference or a judgment, but simply to make an evaluation of what's going on. So we're going to go back, look at an old article a little bit. If you've read the Allison article about Cuba, that's the reference I'm using. Then we'll talk about the James Thomson article on Vietnam, which came out about the same time as the Allison article. We're going to use the Allison article to understand things that are in the Thomson article as a practice. Not that Cuba and Vietnam policy are at stake today, but that as a practice of applying the conceptual material, as we're going to go forward from here, you on your own get to use the concepts to try to figure out what you think is happening in foreign policy today. So let me say, we're going to start with Graham Allison, who did his PhD at Harvard and then got on faculty at Harvard on the strength really of this argument, first an article in the book. And so he offers us three conceptual, he calls them conceptual models of foreign policy, three explanatory claims about how to think about what's happening in foreign policy making. The rational actor model is a model that looks a lot like, looks at states as unitary individual actors making cost-benefit calculations about their policies toward other countries. The organizational process model is a discussion of how bureaucratic organizations behave and how they, in particular, how they implement policy. They make policy, but they're more important, they implement. And then the bureaucratic politics model, which I personally call the political process model, is about how individuals play politics, the politics game in Washington, D.C., and affect policy making. So there's different cuts. There's this sort of the whole state, there's organizations within the state, and then there's individuals who sit in organizations and also work as relevant individual personnel in the state structure. And there's different processes result from these different facets, these different features. And he cuts the story up in these different ways to help us get a different sense of the story. None being the answer, but sets of answers and sets of explanations, and really can be used to answer different kinds of questions, which we'll see when we get to the story of Cuba and the Missile Crisis in 1962. So first, a couple observations, walk through the models a little bit, make sure we understand them as far as I can do, talking to a non-responsive camera, can't ask questions. So if you do have questions about the material, please get on the discussion board and ask it there. There is a document on the website called Allison Overview, which is what I'm showing here, and you can look at that as well as having read the article. The document has a table that looks like this, and I made up for each model, rational actor model, organizational process model, bureaucratic politics model, I made up a set of categories about what it covers. I chose the actors that the model emphasizes as relevant to the policymaking analysis it's offering. Who's playing the game, who's in the story that matters. The goals that those actors have. So the actors that are identified as relevant in the story, by the model, have goals specific to them. Other actors that show up and other do in fact participate in this, but are not captured in the model, we're not going to be talking about their goals necessarily. The strategies and procedures of decision making that those actors undertake in order to meet their goals. So actors use strategies in order to pursue their goals. The constraints that those actors face in implementing their strategies to meet those goals. And then finally, the sort of overall process that determines the policy choice. So a general summation of the policy process. Let me go through each model according to each phase quickly, and then talk about Cuba along the way, or other examples. So the rational actor model is that model that looks like the old-fashioned realist state, meaning a realist, not that they are balance of power folks, although they typically are, but rather states as unitary actors, states as a single-brained organism that undertakes its policy-making process without regard to democratic inputs or competing political values. Rather, when we read the newspaper, Beijing says this. Well, as if Beijing is a one-brained entity that speaks on behalf of all. China, a unitary state. That state tends to preference order its goals. It will rank order. We want security. We want economic well-being. We want free trade. We want environmental protection. They'll rank order those goals. And security goals tend to rise to the top of that preference ordering. And then to pursue those higher preference goals, they come up with a set of alternative strategies. They will prioritize goals and then undertake strategies to meet those priority goals and evaluate those goals in a cost-benefit kind of way. We can achieve this goal for this cost. We can achieve those two goals for those costs. Let's weigh those costs and those benefits to make it kind of rational from the economic sense of the word. The only constraints that a state faces is their own relative power. We won't have all these goals. We don't have the ability to pursue those many goals, so that we will make choices based on what we perceive to be our relative power. The Cuban case is instructive here, or we are instructed about the Cuban case with respect to the fact that the American decision-making in some ways looked very rational active. 8 or 10 or 12 people got together as a sort of, if you almost a single organism, the ExCom, Executive Committee, specifically appointed by the president to sit and assess the goals and weigh all the options and compare the goals to the options and think through a very rational process, all the way from bomb Cuba to do nothing at all and everything in between. This looks like a rational active kind of process. Very few people involved, very few trusted individuals, not even let out to the vice president because the president didn't particularly trust him, and which shows up here later in another model. But the point being, in some ways, it looks like a rational actor. Now, organizational process and bureaucratic politics are in some ways explanations, in my mind, are explanations of where a rational actor breaks down, or a rational actor doesn't fully explain or doesn't well explain because other things also happen. So a rational actor, it may look rational actor on Monday morning when we sit down, we have this meeting, we talk about this range of options, we make the best cost-benefit decision we can make. But then we turn around and say, okay, we've got to implement these decisions, and bureaucracies do that. And they don't implement exactly the way the rational actor intends. And of course, things don't always go the way the rational actor hopes. So, which we'll get to after we talk about what the bureaucracies are the primary actor in organizational politics, organizational process model. The bureaucratic organization, State Department, the subunits within the State Department, the Pentagon and the subunits within the Pentagon, Navy, Army, Air Force. Each of those organizational actors have their own set of goals. And they don't always match with the national goal or even the other actors in the story. If you had to write a basic ground rule of what organizational actors' goals would be, it would be to maximize their own prestige, their own role, and their own budgets. Organizations tend to want to feel like they are necessary and important, so they want the important work and they want to be involved. You have to know that organizations, lights. You have to know the organization's particular. You have to know the organization's particular goals by knowing who they are and what they are trying to accomplish in their view of their professional life and professional role and professional duties. The procedure by which organizations make a lot of their decisions and undertake a lot of their activity is the standard operating procedure. And anybody who's been in the military, I'm sure, is familiar with how that works. A bureaucracy has a set of procedures it undertakes because it has a set of routine jobs it's doing. And that's both good and bad. It's good because it's predictable, it's reliable, and they get good. They get effective at those jobs. It's difficult to have flexibility or to respond to crises